In 1916, while Europe tore itself apart in the Great War, Carl Jung sat in his study in Zurich staring at a letter from a patient who claimed she could no longer see her future. Not literally, her eyesight was perfect, but psychologically she felt blind. "I wake each morning not knowing who I am or what I'm meant to do," she wrote. "Everything is fog." Jung had seen this pattern before: intelligent, accomplished people living in total confusion about their own lives. But this case became pivotal. As he analyzed her dreams, Jung recognized the same symbols appearing in his own unconscious. Wells of light surrounded by shadow, endless corridors with no visible doors, mirrors that reflected nothing. He realized something profound. She wasn't blind to the future, she was blind to herself. Her vision was obscured not by lack of insight into the world, but by refusal to look into her own heart. That night, Jung wrote in his journal the words that would become one of psychology's most quoted and least understood statements. "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." He wasn't offering poetic wisdom. He was describing a psychological law he'd discovered through his own descent into the unconscious. Clarity isn't found by scanning the external world for answers. It emerges from the terrifying, liberating act of looking within. But here's what makes Jung's insight revolutionary and what most people who quote him completely miss. Looking inside isn't about positive affirmations or finding your true self. It's about confronting everything you've been hiding from yourself: your shame, your shadow, your contradictions, your unlived life. Jung discovered that the fog his patient experienced, and that millions experience daily, isn't caused by not knowing what to do. It's caused by not admitting. The vision you seek is already there, buried beneath layers of denial, projection, and self-deception. And it will remain buried until you develop the courage to look into your own heart and see not just who you want to be, but who you actually are. That confrontation, not meditation, not goal setting, not external achievement, is what creates the clarity Jung described. And once you understand this, everything changes. Not because you become different, but because you finally see yourself clearly. And from that clarity, authentic vision emerges. If you've ever felt lost despite having all the information you need, if you've achieved goals only to feel more confused about what you actually want, if you sense there's a version of your life you're supposed to be living but can't quite see it, Jung's discovery explains why. Modern culture teaches that clarity comes from analyzing options, gathering information, or achieving external validation. But none of these approaches work because they're all looking outside. The vision you seek isn't out there. It's already inside you, obscured by the very mechanisms your psyche uses to protect you from seeing what you're not ready to acknowledge. Neuroscience now confirms what Jung intuited. Self-awareness activates entirely different neural networks than external observation. Dr. Matthew Liberman's research at UCLA demonstrates that introspection, genuine self-examination, not just thinking about yourself, activates the medial prefrontal cortex and creates what he calls self-insight moments, where previously unconscious patterns become suddenly visible. But here's the catch. Your brain resists this process because true self-insight often threatens your current identity. Jung understood this a century before neuroscience could measure it. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The fog you experience isn't accidental, it's protective, and it will persist until you're willing to look into your own heart and see what you've been hiding there. What you're about to discover are the 7 principles Jung used to move from confusion to clarity, not through more information or external seeking, but through the deliberate, systematic confrontation with your inner truth. These aren't comfortable principles. They're not designed to make you feel better. They're designed to make you see clearly. And once you see clearly, you can't go back to the fog. Principle 1. The external. Search trap. Why looking outside keeps you blind. Jung observed that most people spend their entire lives seeking clarity externally, through career achievement, relationship validation, social status, expert advice, spiritual teachers. This isn't wrong, it's inevitable. But Jung realized it's also insufficient. When you base your vision on external references, you're always looking through someone else's lens, following someone else's map. Who looks outside dreams, Jung wrote, not dreams in the positive sense, but lives in illusion, in projection, in someone else's reality mistaken for your own. The neuroscience is striking. Dr. Roy Baumeister's research on decision-making demonstrates that when people make choices based primarily on external validation, social approval, cultural norms, others' expectations, they report lower long-term satisfaction and higher rates of what he calls decision regret, the persistent feeling that they chose wrong, even when the outcome is objectively positive. This happens because the decision wasn't rooted in authentic internal preference. It was a response to external pressure. No amount of external success resolves this because the fundamental problem isn't achieving the wrong goals, it's not knowing what your own goals actually are. Jung saw patients achieve everything society promised would create fulfillment, only to arrive there and feel more lost than ever. The external search hadn't failed. It had succeeded perfectly at the wrong destination. Consider Marcus, a successful attorney who, at 45, experienced what Jung called the midlife confrontation with meaning. Marcus had checked every box: prestigious firm, beautiful family, financial security. Yet he woke daily with crushing anxiety and recurring dreams of being trapped in an elevator. In analysis, Marcus realized he'd become an attorney because his father was one, not through conscious decision, but through unconscious identification. His entire adult life had been lived in response to an external model he'd never questioned. The elevator in his dreams wasn't going up or down, it was stuck between floors, just like his life. Jung would say Marcus was still dreaming, still looking outside, still living someone else's vision mistaken for his own. The practice begins with radical honesty. For every major life decision, career, relationship, lifestyle, ask not, "Is this good?" but "Is this mine?" Write down your primary goals. Then, beside each, note whose voice you hear when you think about it. Your parents', society's, a mentor's, your own? If you can't distinguish your voice from others, you're still in the external search trap. Jung's clarity protocol starts here. You must learn to recognize when you're responding to internal truth versus external pressure. Until you can make that distinction, clarity is impossible because you don't know which vision is actually yours. But recognizing external influence is only step one. The second principle reveals why looking inside feels so dangerous. Principle 2, the heart confrontation, facing what you've been avoiding. When Jung wrote, "Look into your own heart," he wasn't suggesting gentle self-reflection. He meant something far more confrontational, facing the truths you've been systematically avoiding. Your heart, in Jungian terms, isn't just emotions. It's the center of your authentic being, the place where your real desires, fears, and values live. But here's the problem. Most of those truths are unconscious precisely because you've deemed them unacceptable. Looking into your heart means confronting not just who you want to be, but who you fear you are. And that confrontation is what most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Dr. Jennifer Lerner's research on defensive avoidance demonstrates that humans possess sophisticated psychological mechanisms specifically designed to prevent awareness of threatening self-information. When confronted with evidence that contradicts their self-concept, "I'm a good person," faced with memories of cruelty, "I'm independent," confronted with patterns of dependency, people don't process the information and adjust their self-concept. They defend against it, rationalize it, reframe it, or simply refuse to see it. This isn't weakness. It's how the ego protects coherence. But the cost is clarity. Every truth you refuse to acknowledge remains in your psychological blind spot, distorting your vision without your awareness. Jung worked with a woman who presented as the perfect mother, selfless, devoted, always sacrificing for her children. But her children were deeply anxious, and she couldn't understand why. Through analysis, Jung helped her see what she'd been hiding from herself. She resented them. Not consciously, not deliberately, but unconsciously, her devotion was compensation for unacknowledged rage at the life she'd given up to have them. Her children sensed this unconscious resentment and developed anxiety in response to the double message, conscious devotion covering unconscious hostility. The moment she looked into her heart and admitted the truth, "I love them and I resent them," her relationship with them transformed. Not because she became more loving, but because she became more honest. Clarity doesn't require becoming better, it requires seeing accurately. The practice Jung developed, the daily confrontation. Each evening, write one truth you avoided acknowledging that day. Not analysis, not justification, just the truth. I was jealous. I acted out of fear, not principle. I said yes when I meant no. This isn't self-flagellation, it's training your psyche to look instead of hide. Over weeks, you'll notice two things. Fewer truths remain hidden, you're seeing more in real time, and confronting them becomes less threatening. Jung called this building tolerance for self-truth, the prerequisite for genuine clarity. Yet even if you develop courage to look within, the third principle reveals why you still might not see clearly. Principle 3, the projection filter, how you see yourself in everyone else. Jung's most revolutionary insight: you can't see yourself directly. You can only see yourself reflected in others. And not accurately reflected, but projected. Every quality you intensely notice in others, positive or negative, is telling you something about your own unconscious. Who looks outside isn't just seeking answers externally. They're projecting their own inner landscape onto the world and mistaking those projections for reality. This is the projection filter, and it's why looking inside is so difficult. You've been seeing yourself everywhere except where you're actually looking, in the mirror. Neuroscience confirms projection through research on spontaneous trait transference. Dr. John Skowronski's studies demonstrate that when you describe others' qualities, listeners unconsciously attribute those qualities to you, but more importantly, you do too. The qualities you focus on in others become associated with your own self-concept at unconscious levels. Jung understood this instinctively. If you constantly notice others' dishonesty, your unconscious is processing your own relationship with truth. If you're hyper-focused on others' weakness, you're managing your own fears about vulnerability. Your external observations aren't neutral, they're mirrors of internal preoccupations. Jung analyzed a man who despised his colleagues' attention-seeking behavior. The man prided himself on being humble, understated, never drawing attention. But his dreams told a different story. Stadiums full of people applauding him, receiving awards, being celebrated. Through analysis, Jung helped him see his conscious humility was compensation for massive unconscious narcissistic desires. His colleague wasn't the problem. His colleague was a projection screen for the attention-seeking part of himself he'd exiled to the shadow. Once he acknowledged, "I also want recognition, and that's human, not shameful," his obsession with his colleague dissolved. He'd stopped projecting and started seeing both his colleague more accurately and himself more honestly. The practice: identify 3 people who trigger strong reactions in you: irritation, envy, admiration. For each, write exactly which quality triggers the reaction. Then complete this sentence without editing. The quality I see in them reveals that I. Your first uncensored answer is usually projection speaking. If you wrote, reveals that I'm not like that, you're still defending. Keep going until you hit truth. Reveals that I also possess this quality but won't admit it, or reveals that I desperately want this quality but can't access it. Projection work is uncomfortable because it reveals you've been seeing yourself everywhere while thinking you were seeing others. But even identifying projections doesn't guarantee clarity. The 4th principle reveals the deepest obstacle. Principle 4, the shadow basement, where your vision is imprisoned. Jung discovered that everything you reject about yourself doesn't disappear. It descends into what he called the shadow, the repository of disowned qualities. And here's the crucial insight most people miss. The shadow doesn't just contain negative qualities. It contains everything you decided wasn't acceptable, including your power, your desires, your authentic preferences. Your vision isn't unclear because you lack information. It's unclear because the truth about what you actually want is locked in the shadow basement, and you've spent years fortifying the door. Dr. Carl Rogers's research on conditions of worth explains the mechanism. From childhood, you learn which qualities earn love and which earn rejection. The qualities that earn rejection get repressed, creating the shadow. If showing anger got you punished, anger went to the shadow. If being ambitious threatened your family's values, ambition went to the shadow. If your sexuality made others uncomfortable, sexuality went to the shadow. These repressions aren't conscious decisions, they're automatic survival responses. But they come with a cost. The vision for your life that includes those qualities becomes invisible. You can't want what you've exiled. Jung worked with a man who couldn't figure out why every career opportunity excited him initially, then felt wrong within months. Through dream analysis, Jung identified a pattern. The man's shadow contained massive creative and artistic drives his practical engineer father had dismissed as impractical. To earn his father's approval, he'd shadowed all creative ambition and built an identity around being realistic and practical. But his soul wanted art. The careers kept feeling wrong because they aligned with his conscious persona but violated his shadow truth. His vision was imprisoned in the basement. He literally couldn't see a creative path because he'd exiled the part of himself that wanted one. The protocol. Shadow inventory. List qualities you're certain you don't possess and would never want to possess. I'm not selfish. I'm not weak. I'm not attention-seeking. These denials mark shadow territory. Then ask, if I secretly possessed this quality, even in small hidden ways, how would that change my vision for my life? If the answer is dramatically, you've found imprisoned vision. Integration doesn't mean acting out shadow qualities destructively. It means admitting they exist and giving them conscious, appropriate expression. The selfish person can practice healthy self-prioritization. The weak person can allow vulnerability. The attention-seeking person can claim deserved recognition. Vision clears when shadow emerges from the basement. The fifth principle explains why most people never complete this work. Principle 5. The identity threat, why clarity feels like death. Here's why Jung's clarity protocol is so rarely practiced. Looking into your heart and seeing the truth doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like identity annihilation. If you've built your self-concept around being selfless, admitting your selfishness feels like dying. If you've organized your life around being strong, acknowledging your weakness feels like dissolving. Jung understood that genuine clarity requires what he called ego death. Not literal death, but the death of the false self you've constructed. And most people, when they reach this threshold, turn back. Neuroscience explains why. Your brain's default mode network creates narrative coherence about who you are. And threats to that narrative activate the same neural circuits as physical threats: elevated cortisol, amygdala activation, fight or flight responses. Dr. Todd Kashdan's research on identity threats demonstrates that when people encounter information contradicting their core self-beliefs, their brains process it similarly to encountering predators. To your nervous system, admitting you're not who you think you are isn't psychological growth, it's survival threat. Jung analyzed a woman who sought therapy for depression, but resisted every insight that emerged. She'd built her identity around being the strong one, the helper, the rock everyone depends on. When analysis revealed she was exhausted, resentful, and desperate for someone to care for her, she couldn't integrate it. If I'm not the strong helper, she asked Jung, who am I? Jung's answer was devastating and liberating. You're whoever emerges when you stop performing strength and allow yourself to simply be. But reaching that space required her to tolerate the terror of not knowing who she'd be without her persona. Most people, Jung observed, prefer the certainty of a false identity to the uncertainty of authentic being. The practice requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, acknowledging contradictory truths without resolving them prematurely. You are both strong and weak, both selfish and generous, both clear and confused. Practice this daily. I am persona quality and I am shadow quality. Don't explain, justify, or resolve the contradiction. Just hold it. Over time, your nervous system learns that containing paradox doesn't destroy you, it makes you whole. And from wholeness, clarity naturally emerges. But even if you survive identity death, the sixth principle reveals another obstacle. Principle 6, the unlived life, what you've been refusing to become. Jung introduced a concept most people find unsettling, the unlived life. The existence you were meant to live but chose against, often unconsciously. This isn't about regret or alternate timelines. It's about recognizing that your current life, no matter how successful, might be a compromise formation, an adaptation that satisfied external demands while betraying internal truth. And your lack of clarity? It's not confusion. It's your unlived life demanding acknowledgement. Dr. Meg Jay's research on what could have been demonstrates that people experience their most persistent life dissatisfaction not from obvious failures, but from paths not taken. Decisions made to please others, opportunities declined out of fear, passions abandoned for practicality. These abandoned possibilities don't just fade, they haunt. Jung believed they manifest as chronic dissatisfaction, mysterious illness, or what he called the midlife crisis. Not an age-related breakdown, but the unlived life staging an uprising. Jung encountered a successful businessman who, at 52, developed severe panic attacks with no medical cause. Through analysis, Jung uncovered a childhood dream. The man had wanted to be a musician. His family dismissed it as impractical, and he'd built a lucrative business career instead. But the musician never died. He lived in shadow, and now, as mortality became real, was demanding expression. The panic attacks were the unlived life screaming for acknowledgement. Jung didn't tell him to abandon business and become a musician. He helped him find ways to integrate music into his life consciously. The panic attacks ceased. The protocol, Unlived Life Inventory. Write down every path you seriously considered but didn't take. For each, note why you chose against it. If the reasons are external, parents said no, not practical, too risky, you've found unlived life territory. Then ask, what would a life that honored both my current life and this unlived possibility look like? Integration doesn't require starting over, it requires making space for disowned possibilities. The writer who became a lawyer can write on weekends. The artist who became an accountant can integrate art into leisure. Vision clears when you stop exiling parts of your potential. The final principle reveals Jung's ultimate insight. Principle 7, the awakening moment from dreaming to seeing. Jung's ultimate discovery: there's a qualitative shift that happens when you complete the work of looking into your heart. It's not gradual, it's sudden. Who looks inside awakes, he wrote. Not improves, not grows, but awakes. This is the moment when vision becomes clear, not because you've gathered more information, but because you've removed the blocks to seeing what was always there. Jung called it individuation, becoming who you actually are rather than who you've been pretending to be. And it's irreversible. Once you wake up, you can't go back to dreaming. Dr. William Miller's research on quantum change documents these sudden transformative moments. People describe them as feeling like scales falling from eyes, suddenly seeing clearly for the first time, or reality snapping into focus. Neurologically, these moments correlate with rapid reorganization of neural networks. The brain isn't learning new information, it's reorganizing existing information into new patterns. Jung understood this. The awakening moment isn't about discovering something new about yourself. It's about seeing accurately what you've always been but couldn't acknowledge. Jung himself experienced this during his confrontation with the unconscious. For months, he descended into inner darkness, confronting shadows, projections, and unlived possibilities. Then, one morning in his study, something shifted. "I suddenly understood," he wrote, "that I had been living my life as Freud's disciple, not as myself. The moment I saw this clearly, I knew what I needed to do." He didn't become a different person, he became himself. And from that clarity, the entire body of his mature work emerged. Not because he learned something new, but because he could finally see what had always been true. The practice. You can't force awakening, but you can create conditions for it. Daily, ask yourself, if I were seeing my life with complete clarity right now, what would I see that I'm currently avoiding? Write whatever emerges without censoring. Over time, the gap between what you write and what you admit to yourself consciously will narrow. And eventually, in a moment you can't predict, they'll align. That's the awakening moment. That's when your vision becomes clear. Integration, the clarity protocol. You now understand the 7 principles, but Jung knew understanding isn't transformation. The clarity protocol systematizes the process of moving from fog to vision. Weeks 1 to 2, external audit. Identify every major life choice. For each, distinguish external influence from internal truth. Create 2 columns, chose because I should versus chose because I genuinely wanted. This reveals the scope of external-driven living. Weeks 3 to 4, daily confrontation. Each evening, write 1 truth you avoided acknowledging that day. Build tolerance for self-truth. You're training your psyche to look rather than hide. Weeks 5 to 6, projection mapping. Identify everyone who triggers strong reactions. Extract the quality, then find it in yourself. This stops you from seeing yourself everywhere except in yourself. Week 7-8, shadow inventory list. Qualities you're certain you lack and would never want. These mark shadow territory. For each, imagine how your vision would change if you acknowledged possessing it. Weeks 9-10, identity holding practice. I am X and I am opposite of X daily. Hold contradictions without resolving them. Your identity can survive paradox and becomes real through it. Weeks 11-12, unlived life integration. Identify paths not taken. Find ways to honor those possibilities within your current life. You don't have to abandon your life, you have to stop abandoning parts of yourself. The warning: this work will disturb you. Your relationships may shift because you'll stop projecting. Your career may need adjusting because you'll recognize when you're living someone else's vision. You might grieve the years spent in fog. Jung was clear. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming requires unbecoming who you've been pretending to be. That's not comfortable, but it's the only path to clarity. The promise: people who complete this protocol don't just gain clarity about what to do, they experience the awakening Jung described. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes yours. Decisions flow from internal truth rather than external pressure. Anxiety decreases not because circumstances improve, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. And the vision Jung promised emerges, not as a plan imposed from outside, but as recognition of what you've always been meant to become. Return to 1916, to Jung's patient who couldn't see her future. After months of analysis, she arrived at his study with something different in her face. "I had the dream again," she said, "the well filled with light. But this time, I looked into it." Jung asked what she saw. She paused, then smiled. "Myself. The light was always me. I just couldn't see it because I was looking everywhere else. You now possess what Jung discovered through his descent into the unconscious. Clarity isn't out there waiting. It's in you, waiting to be seen. But seeing requires the courage to look into your own heart and confront what you've been hiding. From others, yes, but more importantly, from yourself. Who looks outside dreams, living in illusion, projection, others' expectations mistaken for personal vision. But who looks inside awakes, sees clearly, lives authentically, becomes real. The choice Jung faced is the choice you face. Continue searching externally for clarity that can only emerge internally, or do the work he mapped. Confronting external search traps, facing avoided truths, reclaiming projections, integrating shadow, surviving identity death, honoring unlived life, and finally, awakening. Your vision won't become clear through more information, more achievement, or more external validation. It will become clear only when you develop the courage to look into your own heart and see, really see, what's been there all along. Jung looked, he awoke. The work is the same for you. The fog isn't the absence of vision. It's the refusal to look where vision lives, inside, in your heart.